And for all the sort of unimaginability of a former president facing criminal charges, with this particular former president, there's a lot of these previously unimaginable prospects to keep an eye on. I mean, this is reporting tonight about New York state prosecutors convening a grand jury to consider a potential indictment for him. But this same president is also facing the possibility of a criminal indictment in the state of Georgia, where they are investigating his efforts to interfere with the administration of the presidential election in Georgia last fall. Also, in that investigation, a grand jury has been convened to hear evidence. Even back up in New York, don't sleep on the civil part of the case that is still ongoing in the Attorney General's office. Yes, it made big news when we learned that part of that case had been hived off to become a criminal matter in the DA's office. But the civil part of that investigation continues, and that is nothing to sneeze at. That office, the New York Attorney General's office, brought a devastating civil case against Trump's sham, fraudulent Trump University, which resulted not only in the Trump University being shut down, it also resulted in Trump having to pay $25 million. That same office also brought a devastating civil case against Trump's sham, fraudulent charity, the Trump Foundation, which also resulted in that being shut down and him having to pay millions of dollars in penalty. That is the same office that is now still pursuing its civil investigation of the Trump Organization, the president's business, even as it kicked some piece of that investigation over to the DA's office for criminal prosecution and sort of seconded two of its prosecutors from the Attorney General's office to go over to the DA's office to collaborate with them and work on that criminal case. So all of these things are questions of serious potential liability for the former president. And then there's the question of what's happening at the federal level, the prospect of federal criminal charges against former President Trump. And every time we report on this, I feel a little tickle right here behind my ear, which tells me that Attorney General Merrick Garland has just eaten another fistful of mint-flavored Tums. I get a little notification right here whenever that happens. It is just absolutely palpable that Attorney General Merrick Garland and the Biden Justice Department wants absolutely nothing to do with the potentially criminal trailing ends of the last presidency. They just don't seem like it. But they can only pretend so hard and for so long that that isn't something that has been left for them to deal with. I mean, this is all happening at once. Here tonight is this news of state prosecutors in New York convening a special grand jury to work intensively over a period of 6 months, meeting 3 days a week, to weigh potential criminal charges against former President Trump and other people connected to his business. That is dramatic, right? But at least that's state and not federal. But the federal thing keeps creeping up on the Biden Justice Department, and I'm not sure how long they're going to be able to avoid the question. I mean, within the last 24 hours leading up to this bombshell reporting tonight about what's happening in New York, hey, look, the potential federal case is rearing its head. All this stuff is happening at once. Within the last 24 hours, we learned that Don McGahn, Trump's former White House counsel, the star witness for the several hundred pages of detailed allegations against Trump that he might have committed felony obstruction of justice while he was president multiple times, lots of obstruction of justice. We just learned last night that Don McGahn is going to testify about that alleged behavior by Trump next week. He's going to be testifying for the first time. Don McGahn spoke to prosecutors in the Mueller investigation. That's why we know he's the main witness for most of the most serious allegations against Trump when it comes to federal obstruction charges. But McGahn has never testified about any of it. While Trump was still in office, he blocked McGahn from giving testimony. Now that Trump is no longer in office, McGahn is not going to be blocked from testifying. And it's a funny story as to why. It has to do with money and someone who's feeling a little cheap around the edges these days. This is from Charlie Savage at the New York Times. Quote, immediately after the deal for McGahn to testify was announced this month in a court filing, a lawyer for Mr. Trump had conveyed that former President Trump intended to intervene in the case. Former presidents can invoke executive privilege, and Trump could have sought a court order blocking Don McGahn from testifying. But Late last week, that same lawyer for Trump said that actually Trump would not be intervening after all. The Trump lawyer is said to have provided no reason for the about face. While he was president, Mr. Trump vowed to stonewall all congressional subpoenas. And taxpayer-funded lawyers with the Justice Department fought lengthy court battles and appeals that succeeded in running out the clock on the possibility that Congress would obtain the information they were seeking before the 2020 election. Now that Mr. Trump is no longer president, however, and therefore no longer has access to taxpayer-funded lawyers, there is at least one major difference in how he is approaching this matter now. Quote, to keep litigating over the matter now, Mr. Trump would have to pay the legal costs himself. He'd have to pay himself for lawyers to try to block McGahn from testifying? Himself? We all know that the man does not like to pay for things himself. And so he will no longer try to block Don McGahn's testimony. He would have to pay lawyers in order to try to do that, and he's not doing that. And so Don McGahn is going to testify to Congress next week.